What dinosaurs would be in Jurassic Park if it actually only had Jurassic animals? If we're talking about the movies, they did get one right with the Brachiosaurus. Another dinosaur in the movie, despite its inaccuracies, was still from the Jurassic, that being Dilophosaurus. The Brachiosaurus and Dilophosaurus are the only dinosaurs we actually see in the movie that are from the Jurassic. Everything else is from the Cretaceous. So let's swap them around for some Jurassic animals. Parasaurolophus is a hadrosaur, but there's no true hadrosaur equivalent in the Jurassic because they didn't really start evolving until the Cretaceous. So the closest would probably be a large ornithopod like Camptosaurus. For Triceratops, we'll replace it with the dinosaur that was supposed to be in its place anyways, Stegosaurus. Imagine if this scene was a Stegosaurus instead of a Triceratops. For Gallimimus, I was thinking of replacing it with a small, lightly built ornithopod like Dryosaurus, but come to think of it, I think Elaphrosaurus would actually be a better equivalent, especially since Elaphrosaurus might be an omnivore. Velociraptor is probably the hardest one to change because there's no true equivalent in the Jurassic. The closest we'll get is probably animals like Ornitholestes or the small Coelurosaurs Yuolong. In contrast, the easiest one to replace is the Tyrannosaur, because there's only two real options. It can only really be Torvosaurus or Allosaurus. Personally, I think they could have made an absolutely brilliant movie with all of these animals, but what do you folks think? Let me know in the comments down below. What dinosaurs would be in the Lost World Jurassic Park if it actually had all Jurassic animals? There are three dinosaurs in the movie that are actually from the Jurassic, that being Compsognathus, Mamenchisaurus, and of course the Stegosaurus. We'll replace the others with Jurassic dinosaurs, but we won't repeat any of the ones used in the last video. For Gallimimus, I figured that the small, nimble Dryosaurus would serve as a good analog, even if they're not as omnivorous. I thought about swapping Triceratops with one of its smaller Jurassic relatives, but honestly they wouldn't be big enough to make the same impact. So let's replace Triceratops with one of the earliest ankylosaurs, Spicomelus. Pteranodon appears briefly in the film, and even though it's not a dinosaur, we can still replace it with a Jurassic pterosaur. We'll use one of the largest Jurassic pterosaurs known as Jursk, a Rhamphorhynchid. For Parasaurolophus, it has to be some kind of large ornithopod, so I figured we'd go with a rather obscure one known as Abletosaurus. Pachycephalosaurus is a little harder to replace since there's none of its kind in the Jurassic, so I figured we'd go with the armored bipedal Salitosaurus. Once again, raptors are a bit difficult to replace, but this time we'll swap them out with a relatively small megalosaurid known as Martiasaurus. And for T-Rex, we'll swap them with another giant Jurassic carnivore known as Yangshuanosaurus. What would you folks replace them with? Let me know in the comments down below. What if Jurassic Park 3 was actually Jurassic and only had dinosaurs from the Jurassic? Just like the previous two films, they do have some Jurassic dinosaurs. Brachiosaurus, Stegosaurus, and Compsognathus all make a reappearance from previous films, but for the first and last time, a Jurassic film also included Ceratosaurus. But let's swap around all the Cretaceous critters. Pteranodon is an absolute menace in the film, so I replaced it with one of the larger Jurassic pterosaurs, Harpactognathus, which had a wingspan of around 8.2 feet. Triceratops only appears briefly from a top-down view, so I figured we could replace it with a large stegosaur known as Dacentrurus. A cool-looking Ankylosaurus appears briefly in the film, so I figured we'd replace it with Gargoyleosaurus, one of the most well-known Jurassic ankylosaurs. Parasaurolophus and Corythosaurus are two hadrosaurs that appear in the film, but unfortunately there's no real equivalent to them in the Jurassic. So we'll replace them with two relatively large ornithopods, that being Uteodon and Draconix. Once again, the Velociraptors don't really have a true equivalent, so we'll go with the small Coelurosaur known as Tannicalagrius. T-Rex was one of the biggest and baddest dinosaurs during its time, so let's replace it with the original big bad dinosaur, Megalosaurus. When it comes to Spinosaurus, it's probably one of the most difficult ones in this series that I've had to replace. This may be controversial, but I picked Ostafricasaurus as the replacement. If you didn't already know, Ostafricasaurus is a very likely dubious Spinosaurid from the late Jurassic of Tanzania. They're only known from a pair of teeth that are tentatively assigned to Spinosaurids. What do you folks think of these replacements, and what would you swap around instead? Let me know in the comments below.